Thanks for having me here today.
All right, so welcome to the Ring of Democracy, a non-political nonprofit organization. My name is Stacy, alongside Angelica Campos, and today our goal is to inform and engage the public in meaningful dialogue with electoral candidates.
Yeah, so today we're excited to have Sean Frame here with us, running for the California District 6 Assembly. Mr. Frame, what motivates you to run for office? What's your vision for California's District 6, and what are the issues that are closest to your heart in this race?
Well, that's a lot. I don't want to take up the whole time on the first answer, but I'll just say, I never imagined myself running for any office. I was a small business owner for 25 years plus, and my public service at that time really was limited to volunteering at my son's school. I worked in the garden program there. I started a filmmaking program after school for third to eighth graders. And then when my son Everett was in second grade, his principal was shot and killed during the school day. And as somebody who was a volunteer at the school and spent a lot of time there, I knew him really well, and he was the kind of person that you want in charge of an elementary school. He knew every kid by name. He knew their family situations, and his catchphrase was "Do the right thing." And when I was asked to step up and run for the school board in the wake of that tragedy, I did, because it's the right thing to do. And of course, you think you know a lot about a school, and then you get on the school board and you find out that you really don't know a lot about the school community. For example, I didn't know that 10% of the students in that school district were homeless at any given time, or that 70% of the students at my son's school were food insecure. And so, when you start learning those things, you realize that there's a lot that has to be handled at a higher level that you can't do within the four walls of the school. And that's ultimately what motivated me to seek higher office. I currently work at the Sacramento County Office of Education. In fact, that whole experience really forced me to change my entire perspective and my career. I work in education now. And the fact that I've spent those 9 years on the school board, I've learned everything there is to learn about education policy, about our state budget. And so, obviously education is a big part of my focus, but, I wouldn't be living in this area if I didn't say that affordable housing in particular, and how we help our unhoused neighbors wasn't the number one issue on everybody's mind here. We're 60,000 units short of the number of affordable housing units we need in Sacramento. And that drives people out into the street, right? We have over 10,000 people living outside right now. I've lived in California my entire life. I've lived here in this region for quite a while, and I've never seen it like this. And so if we don't fix the affordable housing gap that we have, and we don't start finding solutions that are real solutions, tangible solutions for the folks who are currently unhoused, I wouldn't feel like I've done my job as a member of the assembly. That has to be our focus. And it's not just spending money. We just spent $177 million, and the problem got worse. The problem got worse because nobody said, we're going to create X number of affordable units of housing with this money, or we're going to create X units of safe and supportive housing with this money. We said we're going to spend the money. We've spent the money. Well, 25 million is still sitting at the county. We can get into that later, but we spent the money and we didn't get the outcomes we wanted. So, when I see that, and I see a race filled with folks who have been in that building and yet haven't been pushing for that accountability, I'm motivated to run and try and bring something better to our city and our region.
Got it. Thank you. Now, I want to start from the top. I know you were sharing your experience and background in education and school board. So, based on that, what specific policies would you propose to improve public education in the 6th Assembly District?
Well, the first thing we need to do is make sure that zip code isn't the determinant of whether you get a good education or not. That's still true to this day, even though we've tried to put more local control, into our funding formula. The reality is that zip code is still a determinant of the quality of education you get. What does that mean? Well, it means, first of all, that we need additional funding sources. I pushed hard for the split roll for schools and communities first a couple of years ago. I literally organized around that, tried to help get it passed. It didn't pass, but we should be looking at that again. because bringing that money into the local system would free up more money at the state level to bring down to our schools. So there is a funding issue there. California is still in the bottom quartile of all states in terms of funding per pupil, and it's particularly at the bottom when you look at communities that need it the most. So that's one thing I would do. Second thing I would do, is somebody who has experience at the negotiating table with my union at the Sacramento County Office of Ed, is I would push for administrative reform. So there are other people in this race who have been endorsed by the administrators, but I would just say this: when administration becomes half of a budget of an agency, as it is at the Sacramento County Office of Education, that money that's intended to get down to the classroom to help special ed students, to help our students in the most, in El Centro, that's not getting there. And it's not getting to the people who provide the services. We've got an administration problem where we have people making $500,000 a year in the same agency where people are making $20 an hour and working 2 and 3 jobs and struggling. So we absolutely have to have administrative reform that caps the amount of money that can be put into administration and make sure that the money we spend from the state level gets down into the classrooms and especially into the communities where it's needed the most. Nobody else in this race has proposed that kind of reform because, frankly, it's the kind of thing that gets powerful people to push back on you. But I'll just say this: I'm not afraid to speak the truth, and I'm not afraid to go at the problem in a very direct way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And, the next question was related to, the funding disparities among different school districts. A question I had, if you didn't already answer this, if you wanted to get in further details, how do you plan to address the funding disparities among different districts to ensure that all students have access to quality education?
Well, yeah, so it's just what I was getting at. I mean, first of all, we need to make sure that the money isn't stopping at the boardroom and not getting down to the classroom. You see that in almost every single district. So the districts are very top heavy. The second thing we need to do is look at the makeup of the district and actually, when money is earmarked to go to a specific population, for example, English language learners get extra funding at schools, we need to actually make sure those dollars are carefully tracked so that those students are seeing those funds. What we often see is money that's earmarked for students that foster youth or with low socioeconomic students or English language learners. It gets rolled into the general fund, and maybe a couple lines are put into the budget, into the LCFF to explain how the money was spent, but there's no actual tracking and accountability of those funds. So sometimes the money is there and it's just not being spent the way it was intended to be spent. You might see new uniforms for a football team where the money should have been spent on an after-school reading program, right? And those kinds of things happen all the time. So I do think we need greater accountability for the funds that are earmarked for those populations. And then again, we need to expand the overall funding, as I mentioned first, which is, we are at the bottom. The problem we fundamentally have in California is there isn't enough for those school districts who do rely on the state. Prior to Prop 13, back in the day, when I was in 5th grade, I think it was, Prop 13 passed, we were about 70% local funds and 30% state. Now we're the opposite. It's 70% state and 30% local. And I'm excluding the portion that's federal. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but just say that that's the rough formula that's flipped. And what that flip means is that most school districts are dependent upon funds in Sacramento for their basic programs. And so if we could fix some of that by eliminating the split, by creating a split roll where corporations are finally reassessed and starting to pay property taxes at modern values instead of at 1975 rates, it would do a lot in some of the most vulnerable communities, particularly places like Richmond, California, where Chevron is the #1 landholder and they're paying taxes at 1975 rates.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Frame. Now, I'm going to shift back to one of the issues you said was really critical is housing affordability. So how do you envision making housing more affordable and accessible to residents of Assembly 6 District?
So I've been working at this from the moment that I started running because I knew that this would be the most important thing I could work on. First of all, we know that we were 60,000 units short, and that was a couple of years ago. My guess, from what I understand, we're actually net losing affordable housing every year instead of gaining it. Mm-hmm. So first of all, first thing we have to do is stop making sure that people think that the affordable housing we have doesn't roll up to market rates. We have to stop that as fast as we can. That can be done. Second thing we need to do is we need to build affordable housing. We currently have laws that prioritize infill and prioritize development along transportation corridors. Those are good laws. The problem is that developers are exploiting those laws to build market rate and luxury housing. Not far from where I live right now, they used those laws to build 24 new units. And I was like, that's very exciting. We got 24 new units. By the way, it was right across, diagonally across the street from a homeless camp that had been cleared. And I thought, oh, great, they're building affordable housing. And you know what I found out? They're not building affordable housing. They're building 24 $900,000 units. Those units, by the way, for the average would cost double the average income of somebody who lives in Sacramento. So let's be clear, those units aren't for people, anybody who lives here. They're for people at the highest echelons. They're probably second homes. They're transplants from other parts of the state, but they don't do anything for the housing right here in Sacramento. So I would say we need to fix that law. And in fact, I put together a youth group called Future Leaders in Policy that includes high school students, undergrads, and graduate students from across the state. And they zeroed in on this law, and we're actually circling right now to creating a piece of legislation that I'll carry when elected that would fix that law, make an affordability mandate on that, on SB 423, which is the law that allowed for that, and fast track affordable housing development and put it to the front of the line, in front of any other kind of development like market rate and luxury. Because if we don't do those things, we're not going to get the units built. We also need to prioritize things like public land trusts and actual building of public housing by the state itself. 55% of the property in downtown Sacramento is owned by the state of California, meaning we already own the place. We should be transforming that as fast as possible into mixed use, affordable housing, commercial, retail. We have the opportunity, like many cities don't. We could reimagine our downtown. Like New York City and San Francisco have a similar problem with their downtowns being vacated, but they don't have the state doesn't own the property. In this case, we own a lot of the property, and we could be doing this work and building the affordable housing we want and creating the kind of community we want from an environmental standpoint as well.
Thank you.
Sean. You know, while we're touching on you know, the diversity in our district of affordability and just in general, our district is very diverse. So how do you plan to meet the needs of underrepresented communities effectively?
Well, I'll tell you this, I'm going to lead the same way I'm running. And the way I'm running is by engaging the community everywhere across this district, but in particular in those places that are forgotten. So, and left behind and disinvested from. So when I kicked off my campaign, I didn't kick it off in the 40s or East Sac or, you know, in Sierra Oaks where I live. I kicked it off in Del Paso Heights. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to be intentional about where I know the state needs to be focusing its efforts in District 6. We didn't just have our kickoff campaign there. We went out from that campaign and immediately started canvassing in that neighborhood. Since then, we've been at over 10,000 doors as a campaign. I personally have been at almost 2,000 doors, and mostly in communities where nobody ever shows up, where people are surprised not only to have a door knock from a campaign, but to have a door knock from somebody who's actually running, and then to have a conversation. I don't just show up and say, vote for me, which is what a lot of folks do. I don't just text them and say, hey, this is who I am, give me your vote. I show up and I say, tell me what's on your mind. Let's have a conversation. To give you an example of what happens when you do that, when I was in one neighborhood, Swanston Park, we were knocking on a lot of doors like duplexes and fourplexes. And there are a lot of seniors out there who are on fixed incomes. And it's definitely not one of the wealthier communities in Sacramento. And what I started hearing at door after door was people were talking about being evicted or being threatened with being evicted. Or in one case, the guy was literally sitting there surrounded by his boxes and he was being moved out the next morning. And now I could have just said this is a tragedy and walked away from the situation. But what I did instead was I brought ACE, ACCE, out there with their housing advocates. And I threw a barbecue at my own expense, by the way, and brought people into the park and said, we're going to let you meet somebody who can help you with your housing situation. Now that's what I'm doing while I'm running. And that is exactly what I'm going to do while I'm in the legislature. And I understand that it's a full-time job, but we get breaks. And in those breaks, I should be in the community. And we also, by the way, now that I've been out in the community, I've met some of the leaders in the community that I can then re-engage once I'm elected and make sure that they're keeping me apprised of what's happening in their neighborhood and making sure that the investment that we're putting into those neighborhoods is actually turning into neighborhood improvement, not just gentrification, not just pouring money at a problem, but actually solving real problems for folks in those communities.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Frame. Now, I know you were sharing that you're doing this work, this level of engagement during your campaign, and you plan to continue doing it if elected as Assembly member. But one thing that I wanted to ask specifically around that, how do you plan to engage the community in the decision-making process and ensure that their voices are heard?
Well, as I did with the youth with Flip, right? I didn't just ask people what they wanted. I said, you tell me what's important to you, and I will work with you to craft the legislation that will accomplish that. And that's the same way I intend to lead, by engaging community leaders in each one of the neighborhoods, by being out there on the regular, by having my staff hold regular office hours in libraries in every part of this district. I will be bringing the legislation that's on the table that affects their community and saying, we need your input, right? We don't want to make decisions about your community without your voice being part of that. I mean, I've been intentional from day one in this campaign that the voice of the people belongs in the people's house. And the legislature, particularly the Assembly, is the people's house of California. So it would be absurd for me to then say that and then just go down there and put my office across the street from the Capitol and never show up in the neighborhood ever again. I want to know from the folks who are affected how a legislation impacts them, and I want to have that conversation, and I want to, if necessary, bring folks to testify, because I think there's nothing more powerful than the story of a person in the community talking about how a particular piece of legislation affects them. If you've been in that building, you know that's not very common, by the way. Like you will definitely see, lots of interest groups testifying, but it's not that as common that you see the people impacted by a law downstream talking about it before the vote happens.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And pivoting here a little bit, as a small business owner and advocate for workers' rights, how do you plan to promote economic opportunity in the district, particularly for small businesses and working class families?
Well, there's two parts of that, right? One is that small businesses are definitely the foundation of any prosperous economy. So, you can see when there's investment in small businesses, you see the community flourish. So when I started my business long ago in 1991 in San Francisco, I moved my business into what was called an economic empowerment zone in the city. It was a place that had been disinvested from, and they provided some modest incentives for business owners to move their businesses there. Now, this was in South of Market, San Francisco. I don't know if you know that neighborhood, but that's where the stadium is now for where the Giants play. At that time, it was a neighborhood with, that was falling down and was disinvested from. So I definitely would like to prioritize getting money to redevelopment and prioritizing small businesses, particularly in places like Del Paso Heights, where we've got that beautiful historic boulevard that has been disinvested from for years. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is a broader function that I see as a real opportunity. We know with the climate crisis that we are going to have to invest at all levels of infrastructure because our infrastructure is going to have to change. Now, the current goal of the state is by 2045. I think if we're being realistic, we've got to be a lot more aggressive about that than 2045. And that means a lot more investment in green technologies and green jobs. It means a just transition, and it means union jobs. And what is a just transition? It means that the folks who have been harmed the most by our current fossil fuel economy would be at the forefront of where we invest in the new green economy. And so we're going to have to create lots of jobs and investment. And if you do that, that kind of money infused into our economy is going to be amazing for Sacramento. And by the way, being right here in the capital, we should be the leaders. Sacramento as the capital of the fourth largest economy on the earth, should be the place people look to as a model of what can be done. Not the forgotten place it often is in our state, just because there's so much more population in other parts like Los Angeles and the Bay Area.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Frame. And it's funny you brought that up because one of the questions that I had for you was in regards to the zero emission by 2030 goal that exists in California. And my question was going to be around policies that you envision to guarantee workforce development and economic opportunities for disadvantaged communities. You started touching on it. So if you can elaborate, that would be great.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the state's goal is net by 2045. They're saying 90% by 2030. I would like to see it be much more aggressive, and I think 2030 would be a better goal, given that that's the red line that world scientists have given us for starting to reverse climate change. Like, I don't think we should wait another 15 years to get to zero. And we're going to have to invest in every last thing you can think of, whether it's simple things that like, going after the urban heat zones that we have, where, you can, if you looked at a map of, socioeconomic status and heat zones, you would see very quickly where the cool and the warm parts are in the city. So simple projects like putting trees in places and creating cover that will actually take the temperature down in the most dangerous climate threat we face, which is not going to be flooding or fire. It's actually going to be heat, particularly here in Sacramento. So that's one thing we could do. And we should be prioritizing that the work be done by folks in the community. There's no reason we should be hiring outside contractors to do work when there are people in those communities who could easily be a part of this work. We should be looking for the small businesses and individuals in the parts of the city can do that work. And other related work that's not related to climate change, by the way, which is an opportunity. I mean, Sacramento has the worst lead poisoning of any part of the state of California. So what does that mean? It means we have to get rid of those old lead pipes that are poisoning our children and replace them. Again, we should be prioritizing local business and prioritizing those communities who have taken the most harm from that. I was just in a part of the district yesterday Sunday, where the lead in the water is a real issue. It's not something hypothetical you just see in the B. I mean, people will tell you, this is my neighborhood where this is happening. So anytime we're going to be investing, we should be prioritizing the communities that have suffered the harm when we're looking for folks to do the work. 2, prioritizing the small businesses that can do that work in the local community. And 3, if it's work that requires more of a trade level skill, we should be making those union jobs and bringing folks in from the community and getting them into the apprentice program so they can become union members in good paying jobs, because that's an upward spiral. When people actually make a real income to do work, when they have benefits, when they have a retirement, they will spend that money back into the community, and the community grows more prosperous as a result. So I, as somebody who is a union member and a negotiator for my bargaining team, I will definitely want to prioritize union labor wherever possible in those jobs, because I do think that that's how we're going to get there. And I would love to see the small businesses, by the way, have unionized workshops. I think, have unionized shops for their trades work, because I think that's good for everybody, from my own experience.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And, you touched a little on climate change. Addressing climate change is vital. What local initiatives do you propose for District 6 to combat this global challenge? You touched on it a little bit, but yeah, if you'd like to elaborate.
Yeah, well, we definitely need more active transit corridors. We need to be prioritizing changing our zoning to make sure that when development is done, it's done with with that in mind, with climate impact in mind. Meaning, it should be done next to transit corridors. It should be done, with a mixed use, so that people don't have to travel long distances to get to their job or to their shopping. That would be huge, right? It would just cut down on vehicle miles traveled. And we know if you cut down vehicle miles traveled, you cut down on carbon emissions. Obviously the next step is at long term, we have to be creating a much better regional and local transit system. We cannot survive on a transit system that was designed 30 years ago, right? It just doesn't go enough places and provide enough services. That we don't have transit to the airport, to me, is shameful. We should have done that long ago. I know they're looking at doing that, but obviously we should be investing in greater transit, particularly, you know, that regional kind of transit that, you know, where people have to go to a particular place that's a great distance. But the reality is we need to make this city more bikeable, more walkable, more together. And if we do that, we'll be going a long way toward meeting the climate goals of our state and you know, setting a model, by the way, for what other cities could do. I've seen a little bit of that happening so far. I think it's encouraging. It gives people an idea of what it might look like if you did that. And I think we should do more. And obviously, long term, we're going to have better electric vehicle infrastructure for those times when people do need to travel distances and transit isn't a possibility. But I do understand that from a socioeconomic point of view, you know, electric vehicles aren't still way out of the reach of the average working class person. And so if we're going to, you know, prioritize anything, we should prioritize the things that we can do that are within the reach. Will actually make the lives better for folks who are already struggling to pay rents that are too high and food bills that are too high and all the other things of life.
All right, thank you. We are nearing 30 minutes, so I have one more question for you before we start to wrap up. Mr. Frame, how do you plan to represent District 6 interests in the context of broader state level priorities? Like, tell us a little bit more about that if you may.
Well, as I said earlier, you know, I think Sacramento should be the model for the rest of the state. I mean, we have the capital in it. We should be the place that people look to see how things can get done. And what that means is advocating for it. The reality is that the people who are making the laws spend a reasonable amount of their time in our city. So, you know, they have a vested interest in making it better and also an understanding of what makes this city great already. So I do think there's a little bit more direct advocacy I would like to be doing with the folks I work with in the building, because I think that Sacramento could be the jewel of the state. And we're not far from that, but we need actual advocacy for that. And it means that, you know, if we do some of the other things I talked about, we're going to get there, by the way. If we have better transit, if we have more a downtown that is thriving and vibrant with, you know, mixed use, commercial, retail, you know, we're going to have the kind of city that other cities will want to emulate. And by the way, as other cities are struggling to figure out what they're going to do, because we're so much owned by the state, we will be able to have the opportunity to show people what can be done, to reimagine what an urban, you know, a modern urban city looks like, and should function like. And that's the kind of advocacy I want to bring every day. My wife Ellen grew up in Sacramento. You know, we live in the house she grew up in. We take care of her mother, who's 92 years old, and she, you know, her stories about what this city has gone from to are amazing. And she's also seen, you know, over the years, all the different things that have happened that weren't the best, right? Development ideas where we started moving out into the country and sprawling our city out instead of focusing on the core that was already here and was already thriving. But, you know, her love of the city has been infectious for me. And I want to take that love of the city and this region into the state legislature and get my coworkers there to really understand what we can do here in Sacramento.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Frame. As we're closing, before we say our last few things, we want to invite you to take 1 to 2 minutes just sharing with the community why a vote for you is important and what you bring to the table, because we want the voters to know who they're voting for and be educated and throughout this process.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you know, I know voters have a lot of choices on the ballot, and it's never easy when you're faced with that many choices. But I'll say this, you know, if you look around and you see things that you feel like should have gotten better by now, if you think that the status quo isn't where we ought to be, then I'm the candidate you should be voting for. I'm not somebody who's a creature of the building who's been down there backslapping people while things have gone downhill, right? And I'm not somebody who's looking to make the next jump to my next political office and the one after that and the one after that. I'm somebody who is running to be the best representative of Sacramento and the surrounding regions, including the unincorporated areas, which, by the way, are almost 40% of this district. I'm not running to, make more friends. I'm running to have advocacy for this region, to bring voices into the Capitol who have never been there before, right? And you can look around and tell. You don't have to go far in this district to know where people have just been left behind and they shouldn't have been. And so if you want somebody who's going to go in there and fight for you every single day with your needs in mind, leading with your needs in mind, then I'm definitely the person you want to vote for. Nobody else in this race thinks about it that way or talks about it that way, or frankly has run that way, has done the work, has been at the doors, who's had the conversations with people that I've had. Nobody else has done that, and I'm going to continue to do it when I'm elected to the assembly.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And to our audience, we hope this conversation has been enlightening. The Ring of Democracy encourages you to actively participate and vote in the democratic process.
And join us next time as we continue to bring you closer, to provide information, and also bring you closer to the people that are running in your district. Thank you so much, Mr. Frame.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do. Can I just say something before I go?
Of course.
I love what you're doing here. Like, to me, the idea of reinvigorating our democracy, that's where it's at. And that's frankly, when I go out and do the work I do, you give people hope when you give them the opportunity to participate. So thanks so much for what you're doing there today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Frame. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.